Check out this super cute windmill tote. So this kit came in my Rebs Fab stash box and I was so excited to make it. I finally got around to it and this is such a fun pattern. I was really surprised at how quickly and easily it came together because it really kind of looks complicated the way it wraps around. And you can see the fabric that they chose for the subscription box is these motto panels, and I think it was perfect idea for this type of bag. It is so cute, and the inside of it comes together the same way, so you could totally use this as a reversible tote. I did cut my straps incredibly long, so it does hang a little long to the side, but it's kind of nice that you can do it crossbody style. If you're carrying a lot at a farmer's market or something like that, it would definitely be a little more comfortable. But I figured I could always tie it up and be able to just wear it on my shoulder if I want. So I don't think I'm going to adjust them. If you want to make a bag like this, go ahead and follow along with me, but I did find a free pattern from DIY Joy. I'll put the dimensions that she uses up on that pattern. It looks like it'll be a tad bit smaller than this bag, but once you do the pattern once, you will definitely see how it comes together and you could make some adjustments to make the bag the size that you want. So I'll put a link in the description of this video to that, that pattern, and you can follow along with. All right, let's get started. To get started, I am laying out my lining fabric in the windmill pattern and then taking right sides together and pinning in place. So here's the windmill pattern that you'll be using. And I am going to mark a 1/2 inch away from the center because we're not going to stitch that area. And I'm also going to mark my 1/2 inch seam because it just helps me sew a little more evenly because we are using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So I'm getting everything pinned in place and then just sewing that 1/2 inch seam, stopping just before a 1/2 inch away from that inside edge of these rectangles. So the nice thing about this project is that you do pretty much the exact same thing with the outer fabric as with the lining. So I'm going to put them in that windmill pattern, bring right sides together, pin, sew a 1/2 inch seam, stopping a 1/2 inch before getting to that center point that intersects where the two sides meet, so that I have room to bring them together later. Now that I have the inside lining of the bag and the outer fabric of the bag sewn together in that windmill fashion, I'm going to bring these seams at the center together and pin, and then also leave a 1/2 inch, and I like to mark that away from each edge that is going to be left unsewn after I sew this 1/2 inch seam across here. So I like I did before, I'm going to draw out my 1/2 inch seam just so that I make sure I get it nice and even, and I'm going to do the exact same thing with the outer fabric of the bag. So I'm going to match that seam up, pin right along it, and draw out my 1/2 inch seam allowance, leave a 1/2 inch on either side to make sure it's unsewn, and head to the sewing machine and sew across here. I love that the inner lining and the outer fabric of this bag is done pretty much in the exact same way. It makes it so much easier to remember what to do, and I could definitely see these being made nice and quickly as gifts or for craft fair event or something like that. Okay, so I'm going to start with the outside of the bag, and you're just going to take one of those long windmills, fold it over, and pin along the side. And I think this part is just so smart and easy. You're just going to line it up, pin, and sew a 1/2 inch seam across the side of the bag. And the reason I find this so easy is that you're really going to do this for each of these kind of windmill sides of the bag. So after you sew, you're just going to move on to the next one and do the exact same thing. I did find that clipping inside the seam allowance right where it was sewn before did help me line these up and sew a lot better and get a little more crisp of a crisp seam there where it starts. But you know, I don't think it's necessary. It just helped me a bit. So you just work this way through. I still like drawing out my 1/2 inch seam allowance, and really you just work through each of these long kind of windmill rectangles, fold it over, place some pins to keep it lined up, and sew that 1/2 inch seam allowance. It's really, really quite easy. And you're actually going to do the exact same thing with the lining of the bag, just with the lining of the bag on one of these sides, we're going to do it just a tad bit different. All right, so with the lining of the bag, we are going to leave one small section open on one seam of this bag because we need to keep it open for turning. So what I'm going to do is pin just like before, but I'm going to leave about 6 inches or so unsewn so that I can turn the bag later. So what I'm going to do is mark my 1/2 inch seam allowance just as before, but you're going to see that I make some X's where I'm going to ensure that I don't sew there so that I can leave it open for turning later. So there you go, there's that hole on that side, and then for the rest of them I'm going to sew them completely just as I did with the outer side of the bag. So I pinned my straps right along the points on the top of the bag, and then I put the outer side of the bag right sides together with the lining of the bag and pinned all along the top of the bag. And now I'm just sewing the bag together. So I'm just following around the top of the bag where the lining meets and carefully getting a nice 1/2 inch seam allowance all along the top of the bag. So just sew very slowly. When you get to those tight kind of angles, you may want to go very slow, backstitch if you need to. I cut into the seam allowance a little bit if I needed to make sure everything was even. So now I'm just going to trim those points where the strap meets to make sure I reduce some bulk. And then remember that opening that we left in the lining, I'm using that to turn the bag, and then I'm going to line up across the top of the bag, making sure everything meets nicely, and then I will just top stitch around the entire bag. So I like to lengthen my stitch to somewhere between 3 and 4 so that it's a nice long top stitch, and I'm going to top stitch about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge of the bag. I just really like the way that sort of toplet stitching looks. So you're going to want to go slow here. I do have the video sped up, but the slower you go, this top stitching is going to be a lot more nice and even. I really find this part of the bag making process so fun because you're really getting to the end of the bag. You can see how it's come together, and I really love this part. I love being able to see the bag after it is all finished. And then you just don't want to forget to sew that opening we used in the lining to turn the bag. I'm going to sew that closed with just the same sort of top stitching right along the edge. And just like that, the bag is finished, and oh my goodness, it looks so good. The quotes are such a nice touch on the bag. It's a nice shape. I could really see making this bag with different fun colors and getting that nice effect of kind of the panels coming in at a diagonal. Let me know what you think, and let me know if you plan to make one of these windmill bags. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.